Hello and today to be reacting to oversimplified videos. So this is about the French Revolution. Actually, let's combine both part 1 and part 2 in this video. That way we can learn all about the French Revolution in one video. I think I've learned something about the French Revolution in school, but I forgot all about it. So let's watch this video and find out about it and learn something from it. Right, here we go.
So I said to the Marquis de la Fufayette, "What
Jeez.
do you think I am? Some dirty peasant? I've never worked a day in my life."
Okay.
Wow, that Marie Antoinette sure is pretty. Sure is. Wouldn't want to be Prince.
Marie Antoinette.
That's going to be a lot of responsibility when he becomes king, especially since France is in financial ruin. Quite. Thank you one and all for attending the royal marriage of my grandson, the future king of France, to the Archduchess of Austria.
Okay.
Now for the very awkward yet historically accurate part of the ceremony, where we all watch him get into bed together.
Okay. Jeez. They do that.
All right, now
That's how what?
Let's leave the royal couple to it. You better give us an heir, you fat
Okay.
bread boy. Nighty night.
That kind of video is somewhat.
France is in financial ruin. You fat, ill-bred boy. Quite. That's going to be a lot of responsibility. France is in financial ruin. You fat.
Uh-oh, the rumors. Okay.
Oh, great. He's a freaking weirdo.
Nice.
France, the most prosperous, cultured, and beautiful nation in the world, as it had been for centuries. An exquisite social culture, with the king and the upper classes throwing crazy parties every night, enjoying
So they like to disco all night.
high living and fine dining. Who cares that they were only able to do so off the backs of the hard-working, starving poor? What are they gonna do? Revolt? They're only 80% of the population.
80%.
Life
Okay.
in France is great. What's that, France? You want to go to war with Britain and increase your power? Go for it, little buddy. You do you. And you lost. Now you're in severe financial debt. We have no money. What do? Should we stop partying? Heck no. Party harder.
No, okay.
That's okay. The peasantry will pick up the slack. They were created by God to do all the work, and you were created to reap all the benefits and party hard.
Yeah.
That's just how society works, and we
Yeah.
just accepted it.
Social hierarchy.
Why? Why what? Why do the nobility get to be all rich and stuff? Just because they were born into it? And the rest of us schmucks just have to accept that? Hell, why do we even need a king? Who decided that? It all just seems very unfair and unequal. And
Yep.
I, for one, am starting to...
Very unequal.
Wow, that's very enlightened of you. And so began the Age of Enlightenment.
Yes, of enlightenment.
Thinkers across France and beyond began to question whether this beautiful nation was really all that beautiful after all. Hey, Prince Louis, bad news. Your grandpop died of smallpox this morning, which means good news, you're now the king. So just to sum up, France is in severe financial debt, and the angry populace are beginning to question how necessary you are. But hey, I believe in you, champ. You got this. Maybe.
Maybe.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Prince Louis Capet became King Louis XVI in May 1770.
Louis
He was a
16.
notoriously weak man, and he knew it. He barely had the wisdom to rule a nation, never mind one in crisis, and he was easily manipulated by those around him.
Okay.
One of his first acts was to try to get revenge on the British by financing their American colony's revolution. Hey, we're an independent nation now. That was real swell of you, Louis. Couldn't have done it without you. Glad I could help. So hey, about all that money we lent you, when can we get that back? Yep, you're a great guy.
Okay.
I'll never forget what you've done for
He's
me.
gone.
Real glad I could help, friend, but about that money, gotta go now, chum. Best of luck to you. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Now France was in even more debt. France is poor, suffering under the strain of economic ruin, watched as the nobility continued to live as though nothing was wrong. In particular, they grew increasingly disdainful of the queen, Marie Antoinette, as she continued to spend all of France's money on her own luxurious lifestyle and fashion. While the peasants were breaking their backs in the fields, she was walking around like, hey, my hair is a boat. I'm not making that.
Okay.
Her hair really was a boat. And her lavish spending earned her the nickname Madame Deficit. And speaking of the queen,
That's
there's
pretty
also
cool.
a long-standing scandal around the fact that the king took a very long time to boink her, and the working classes of Paris began ridiculing the royal couple with lewd pamphlets depicting the queen as a court thought. And the king, as a
Thought,
was
okay.
able to fulfill his marital duties.
Jeez.
Respect for the monarchy was at an all-time low, as France's finances were spiraling out of control. And the king and his aides really only had one solution to the crisis.
One
Tax the
solution.
poor. Tax the poor. We could do a sexy calendar shoot.
Okay.
Tax the poor. And
Tax
so
the
it was.
poor.
The poor, who were already struggling to make ends meet, found themselves being taxed from every direction. Hey, I'm the royal tax collector. Looks like you've yet to pay your income tax, head tax. By the way, how many windows you got in that house of yours? 3? Oof. Yep, there's gonna be a tax for that. Hey, your local priest here.
Damn,
Paid your church
that's
tithe
tough.
yet? Well, at least this one is going to the good work of God. Sure. God.
Okay.
This year, God wants me to buy a new swimming pool. Hey, private tax collector here. Oh, and I brought some goons with me. Just a few quick questions. How much salt did you buy this year? About
Salt.
7 kilos, I think? Yep. Okay, there's gonna be a tax for that. Oh, what's that over there? And that's extra salt I held over from last year, so I wouldn't have to buy as much this year. Oh, yep, there's a tax for that.
Tax for
What are you
everything.
doing with all this salt? Well, obviously cooking. On the table. Yep. And preserving fish and meat. Oh no. Yep. And there's a tax for that. Hey, how old is he? He's 9. And so he's purchased his required amount of salt for this year, right? What? No, he's 9. Uh-oh. Sorry, little Timmy. Looks like I'm gonna have to tax you for that.
Okay.
Yep. Salty. There's gonna be a tax for that. And that's not all. A huge portion of the peasants' harvest had to be given up. And there was also the labor tax, where peasants were required to work a certain number of days for their local lord without pay. Obviously,
Jeez.
people weren't too happy with these taxation policies, and the aggressive nature of these private tax farmers sometimes even escalated to violence. In particular, though, the people really hated how inconsistent the taxation rules were across the nation, and also the fact that the first 2 estates often had to pay very little, if any, tax at all. And so, the anger continued to grow. France had a population that was just about ready to explode. What could push them over the edge? How about a touch of natural disaster?
Natural disaster.
Harsh summers and winters left the peasants' harvests in ruin, meaning they had no food or money, and the cost of bread skyrocketed. Of course, the upper classes had massive stocks of grain
Yeah,
and wheat.
sure.
They were virtually untouched by this new crisis. But now the poor really were starving, and they began to riot.
Riot.
Took to the streets. Bakeries were raided, and bakers suspected of keeping bread for themselves were sometimes even hanged. Wow, this is really getting out of control.
That's dark.
Your Majesty, we need some decisive action. You need to step up and lead us. What will you do? Okay, I've got this. I know. I'll summon the Estates General, and they'll decide what to do.
What?
You really are a fat, ill-bred boy. The Estates General was the closest thing France had to a government, apart from the king. It was a purely advisory body and was rarely summoned. In fact, it hadn't been summoned for 175 years prior to this. But with France in a severe crisis, the king felt the time was right to call on the government to help. The Estates General was made up of representatives from the 3 estates, that is, the clergy, the nobility, and everybody else.
Okay.
Thanks for coming, everyone. The first order of business is regarding the clergy and nobility. You all get brand new Porsches. You get a
Boys.
Porsche. And you get a Porsche. And you get a
That's
Porsche.
nice.
Everybody gets a Porsche.
Oh,
And now into the
but
second order of business. France is completely out of money. Like, it's never been this bad before. Anyone got any ideas? How about we all get Lamborghinis next time?
okay.
The king decided that in order to make a decision, they had to come up with a voting system.
Voting system.
Clergy, you have a population of 130,000, so you'll get 1 vote. The nobility, you have a population of 350,000, so you'll also get 1 vote.
One
The third
vote.
estate, you have a population of 27 million people and make up 98% of the population. Very impressive. You'll get
No vote.
1 vote. The
One
third
vote,
estate
okay.
were obviously pretty unhappy with this system because they kept on finding that this would happen. We propose to raise taxes on the third estate. All in favor? All opposed? 2-1. Taxes will be raised on the third estate.
Okay.
We propose a motion that says the first 2 estates are a bunch of poo-poo heads. All in favor? All opposed? 2-1. It's official. We are not Poo-poo heads.
Okay.
The Third Estate realized that any attempt at reform would be outvoted by the two upper estates, and they thought that was kind of lame. So they decided that since they were 98% of the population, they could go off to form their own government, make their own laws, and take over the running of the country. And so, the National Assembly was born. The Third Estate was now in control, and there was nothing the king could do to stop. Haha! I've locked you all out of your building. What are you gonna do about it? We'll probably go find a different building that isn't locked.
Uh-oh.
The National Assembly did find another unlocked building, just down the road, an indoor tennis court, where on the 20th of June 1789, they all took the tennis court oath, pledging to continue meeting.
I've heard about that.
Finally gave into their demands for more equality and economic reform. This new National Assembly included many of the most educated members of the Third Estate, including two young lawyers by the names of Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton. Some members of the first two estates even joined their cause. Some of these men formed a radical new political party called the Jacobin Club and quickly became leading figures. While many members of the Third Estate simply wanted more equality, a growing number in this Jacobin faction would begin calling for something even crazier: the removal of the king entirely. And this is where fear began to take hold. With such a volatile situation developing, everyone was afraid of something. The king feared his position was under threat, and he called in the military to take position around Paris. The Third Estate heard rumor of the gathering military force, and the king was planning to round them up and arrest them. Maybe he'd even execute them. It also didn't help that the king had just dismissed France's popular finance minister, who had been trying to make reforms himself. It seemed the king was done negotiating. Fear, left unchecked, often boils over into anger, and detonates with violence. The angry people of Paris, after centuries of cruel inequality, harsh oppression, even starvation, fearful of having their new movement for reform demolished so soon, decided that it was now or never to take action. Screw reform. They decided they'd do one better. How about revolution? The people of Paris, believing the French military was preparing to attack, decided they should arm themselves. The National Assembly announced the creation of a bourgeois militia, the National Guard, and immediately, many troops from the French military defected over to the revolutionary side. In the early hours of July 14th, 1789, a large crowd stormed and raided the Hotel des Invalides, a military hospital where they were able to secure a large number of rifles. The bad news was they weren't able to find any gunpowder for their new weapons. The good news was they knew exactly where to get some. A prison fortress and a symbol of royal tyranny towering over Paris, the Bastille. Mid-morning, the crowd gathered around the Bastille and demanded that the man in charge, Governor Delaunay, surrender the prison and hand over the gunpowder. Obviously, Governor Delaunay was like, no way. So he stalled for time by inviting a few members of the crowd in for negotiations. The crowd, still waiting outside, quickly became impatient, and before long, they stormed the fortress, with the French troops inside. Your Majesty, we've received word that the people have surrounded the Bastille. Governor Delaunay will hold them off. No need to worry. Actually, Your Majesty, it appears the crowd is now headed away from the Bastille. You see? Now. Clearly, Governor Delaunay has defeated them and has them on the run. No need to worry. Your Majesty, isn't that Governor Delaunay's head on a pike? Well, clearly, Governor Delaunay has taken on the form of a bodiless pike-head deity, and the people are so enamored with him, they're parading him around the city. No need to worry at all. When the National Assembly heard about the violence that had taken place, they had two options. Either one, they denounce it and try to carry on the revolution using peaceful means, or two, they say, damn, you stuck his head on a pike? That's pretty hardcore. And we love it.
We love it.
They went with option number two. Some historians believe this reaction paved the way for the utter violence and bloodshed that would become the legacy of the French Revolution. This widespread acceptance of violence during the revolution is also largely credited to the writings of a certain Jean-Paul Marat, a man of science with a horrible skin condition that kept him confined to a bathtub. He began writing a radical newspaper he affectionately named The Friend of the People. Citizens of France, be very afraid. Given the chance, the king and the nobility won't hesitate to massacre us all. The solution is simple. Execute them.
Execute
every last one of them. Cut off 1,000 heads, and if that's not enough, cut off 1,000 more. Oh, hey, Mr. Squeaky. What are you doing down there? You're so cute. Oh, I love you too, Mr. Squeaky. Mwah. Now, where was I?
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Kill them all. It became one of the most popular publications in Paris during the revolution and succeeded in spreading ever-increasing fear and anger among the people. In August, leaders of the National Assembly, with help from a certain Thomas Jefferson, adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, an incredible document that guaranteed liberty and equal rights to all men. And when I say men, I mean men. Despite its
No,
glaring
man.
shortcomings in gender equality, the massively influential declaration would go on to inspire the struggle for liberty and equality across the planet for centuries. However, back in France, the vast majority of the people weren't really so concerned with enlightened ideas of equality as much as they were concerned with the fact that they were still starving.
Starving.
Food was still expensive as hell and hard to come by. The people felt that one reason nothing had been done yet about the crisis was because the king simply couldn't see the problem. He lived in Versailles, a full 20 kilometers southwest of Paris, and as a result, lived in comfort, separated from his dirty, stinking subjects. On October 5th, a crowd of women, 7,000 strong, decided they'd do something unprecedented. They decided they'd remove that separation and confront the king directly. The women marched all the way to the king's palace in Versailles. Along the way, the crowd continued to grow into the tens of thousands. And when
Thousands.
they arrived, they demanded an audience with the king. What are those things outside the palace? They're poor people, your majesty. That's poor people? They say they're hungry. Hungry? Then let them eat cake.
Okay.
Wow.
Cake.
This is the exact BS that led to this whole mess in the first place. You're so out of touch. They're writhing around in the filth, breaking their back to barely scrape by, and they come to you demanding just the basic ability to feed themselves, and you think a slice of cake will sort them out? Well,
Yeah.
then let them eat Taco Bell Crunch Wrap.
Taco Bell.
Wow. They're not that desperate. Members of the crowd actually managed to break into the palace with the intention of killing the queen. They escaped through a secret passage in her bedroom. The enraged mob killed several members of the royal guard and raised their heads on pipes.
They're actually pretty
Which, if you
dangerous.
haven't noticed yet, is something they were quite fond of doing. The king had no choice but to come out and talk to the crowd. He agreed to accept his new position, sharing power with the revolutionary government, and to return to Paris with the crowd, removing the separation between king and subject. King Louis had a problem with people constantly raiding his palace, but one thing he didn't have a problem with was people raiding his computer, because he used NordVPN.
Okay.
If, like me, you
Yeah.
don't hack.
Alright, let's watch the part 2 now. Alright, this is the part 2.
King Louis and his family were now in the Tuileries Palace in Paris, where for the next couple of years, he watched as the revolutionary government began to strip away his power. And fearing for his safety, he had to stay on their good side. Hey, look who it is. It's my favorite revolutionaries. Yep, I'm your #1 fan. What can I do for you?
Number 1 pen.
So we've made a few decisions. First, all of your friends in the nobility are going to have to pay taxes the same as everyone else. Great idea. I love it. And as a side note, the tax money can no longer pay for all your lavish parties. Great. I hate those parties. They're so awkward. And also, we're taking away your Porsche. Oh, come on!
Okay.
I mean, yay. The king continually found demand after demand being made of him to prove his support for the revolution. On one occasion, a mob would invade the palace and demand he wear the revolutionary bonnet. This is the face of a man who is definitely pretending he wants to wear that bonnet. Now around here, I want to mention that one thing King Louis had a problem with was people constantly raiding his palace. But one thing he didn't have a problem with was raiding noobs on this video's sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. Now where was I? Oh yeah. Seeing the situation rapidly turning against him, the king decided it might be a good idea to leave France and mount a campaign to retake his country from abroad. Luckily for him, he was married to an Austrian, so on the night of June 20th, 1791, the king and his family disguised themselves as servants and attempted to flee to the Austrian Netherlands. The royal carriage made a stop in the town of Varennes, and the postmaster there was like, "Hey guys, what's up? Where are you off to? We are but a collection of inconspicuous servants heading for the border for no particular reason at all." Say, you, the fat one, you look kind of familiar.
Okay.
King?
The king.
Let me see your passport. It says here you're King Louis the 16th. Nope, not me.
He's still denying it.
Take him away, boys. The king was promptly returned to Paris, but now the jig was up. His lack of support for the revolution was clear to all, and many considered him a straight-up traitor who tried to abandon his people. As a result, the new constitution of 1791 completely reduced his powers to that of a simple figurehead, a constitutional monarch. However, radicals, such as those in the Jacobin Club, were outraged that the king wasn't to be removed entirely. So a month later, these radicals staged a protest on the Champ de Mars, calling for the king's removal. The government of Paris feared an insurrection was mounting, and they sent the military to disperse the crowd. The confrontation escalated and resulted in the Revolutionary National Guard firing on a crowd of
Okay,
revolutionaries.
jeez.
It was a massacre. The incident exposed a deep division within the Brotherhood of the Revolution. On one side, the moderates who wanted to keep the king as a figurehead. On the other, radicals who wanted to see the king deposed and
Okay.
his role. In the wake of the massacre, these radicals received a wave of support. And speaking of rolling heads, one form of equality the revolution introduced was equality in execution. This meant no more torturous drawing and quartering, no more inhumane hanging. They wanted all criminals, regardless of economic status, to receive the same penalty. A quick
Same
and
penalty.
painless one. Luckily, a man by the name of Dr. Joseph Guillotine had an idea.
Alright,
A heavy
guillotine.
blow falls like thunder. The head flies off, blood spurts, and the man is no more.
So this is how guillotine was invented.
Guillotine, otherwise known as the National Razor. The guillotine made its debut in 1791 as the new form of execution. The writings of Marat and others continued to call for the execution of anyone suspected of working against the revolution. For him, this included some members of the clergy and nobility who had previously benefited from the cruel system of inequality that existed before the revolution. In many parts of the countryside, local lords had found themselves become a target. Sire, the peasants, they're revolting. Oh, come on, that's a bit harsh. Sure, they smell a bit, but I wouldn't say they're revolting.
Jeez.
I see what
Okay.
you mean. Increasingly, these French aristocrats began fleeing France to find solitude in other parts of Europe. And once again, fear began to take hold. The privileged classes of these foreign nations didn't like what they were seeing because they feared revolutionary ideas may spread to their own land. The National Assembly, actually now the Legislative Assembly,
Legislative.
these nations may decide to attack. Then why don't we attack them first? No, you idiots, we are definitely not ready for war yet. Did somebody say something? France declared war on Austria in April 1792 and immediately got pummeled. It also didn't help that Austria's ally, Prussia, joined in the fighting. The Prussian Duke of Brunswick posted a letter warning the revolutionaries that if anything happened to the king, he would burn Paris to the ground.
Burn Paris,
This letter proved
jeez.
to be a massive success in inspiring the people of Paris to do the exact opposite of what he intended. They were enraged by the threat, and on the 10th of August 1792, the tension in the city exploded, and a mob stormed the king's palace. Fighting broke out between the revolutionaries and the king's Swiss guard, with casualties in the hundreds. King Louis fled and took refuge in the chamber of the Legislative Assembly, where Robespierre and his radical Jacobins were gaining ever more power. Given the developing situation, the chamber decided to hold a vote, and in what some considered to be a second revolution, it was decided to suspend the monarchy entirely. King Louis XVI was now just plain old Louis, and he was sent to a prison
Louis Capet.
where an eye could be kept on him. A month later, the newly established National Convention officially declared the French Republic, and society underwent a massive change. Enlightened ideas of democracy and equality were being implemented, but very quickly, these ideas seemed to become secondary to fear, paranoia, and a thirst for blood. The new republic began working to violently remove any semblance of the old royalist regime. The church became a prime target. Priests who refused to take an oath to the revolution were deported or arrested. A new state-sponsored atheistic religion named Cult of Reason was
Cult of
created as a
Reason.
replacement for the Catholic Church. Notre Dame, along with many other churches, had their religious treasures destroyed and were converted to temples of reason. Even the Christian calendar didn't survive, as a brand new revolutionary calendar was soon introduced.
Really?
Hey honey, I'm home. Yeah, whatever, jerk. Whoa, what's wrong with you? You forgot. Forgot what? Everything. This entire year. My birthday was on the 3rd of Germinal, our anniversary was the 12th of Thermidor, and you promised that in Freimeer, we'd go on a romantic
Okay.
weekend to Venice. No, I said we'd do that in December. December hasn't been a thing for years. The government of Paris, now under the control of the radical sans-culottes, began rounding up suspected enemies of the revolution and sending them to prison in the thousands. Naturally, a large number of those arrested were members of the clergy and aristocracy. As France's foreign enemies continued to close in, panic spread. Georges Danton made impassioned calls for men to defend the Republic, and tens of thousands of troops left Paris for the front lines. However, in their absence, Paris was left to its own devices. As enemy troops arrived in Verdun, the people of Paris feared that their crowded prisons were becoming a breeding ground for counter-revolutionary conspiracy. What would happen if the Prussians reached Paris and freed the aristocrats? Marat believed he knew what would happen. The aristocrats would enact their vengeance on the people. Fearing those they had already imprisoned, mobs descended on Paris's prisons. They broke in, and during the brutal September massacres, aristocrats,
Jeez.
priests, and others were tried and executed on the spot. Even women and children weren't spared. With over 1,600 victims, word of the massacre spread across Europe. One British newspaper wondered, are these the rights of man? Is this the liberty of human nature? But there was still one man in particular that Robespierre and his radicals really
Who is there?
executed. Austria and Prussia pledged that after they defeated France, they'd return King Louis to the throne. Well, checkmate Austria and Prussia, because you can't return a man to the throne if he's already dead. Citizen Louis Capet was put on trial for treason. Obviously, he was found guilty, but his punishment was less certain. Many moderates wanted to simply deport him, but Robespierre insisted the revolution could only live if the king was dead. A vote was held, and by just one vote, Louis was sentenced to the guillotine. If you don't mind, I'd like to say a few words first. Gentlemen, I am innocent of everything of which I am accused. Wait,
okay.
It's too loud. They can't hear me. Hang on, I haven't finished yet.
Jeez. Okay.
Uncool. In her prison cell, Marie Antoinette heard the guns fire, signaling her husband's death. Before long, she would meet the same fate. Back on the war front, France defied all expectations and actually managed to push the enemy back. But then more countries joined the coalition against France, and it all went to pot again. What do? Conscript the masses. The National Convention introduced a conscription law, with each regional department having to meet a certain quota of men for the army. However, not everyone was happy with this new law.
Yep.
You see, while Paris was definitely a hotbed for radical revolutionary fervor, some of the regions outside of Paris weren't quite so keen on the revolution. Some were largely still conservative, still supported the church, and just didn't suffer from that much inequality before the revolution. So as the revolution turned increasingly violent and anti-Christian,
the revolution is getting out of control.
Were outraged. Now they were being conscripted to fight for the new republic they hated. That was the last straw. Counter-revolutionary uprisings erupted in a number of regions across France. Some would last for years, such as in the northwest, where a large-scale uprising was led by the Owls.
The Owls.
The Owls? Because their leader was named Jean Owl. Why was he called Jean Owl? Possibly because he could do a really good impression.
Okay.
Really? That's what we're going with? Owls? Just because this guy can do an impression of one? Hit him with it, Jean. Hoot, hoot.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, that's pretty good. The Chouannerie uprising lasted all the way until 1800. In the summer of 1793, the southern city of Toulon invited the British Navy over for some tea and crumpets, and then they asked if they'd possibly like to stay and occupy the city. Being an important naval base, this was a heavy blow to the Republic, who sent a relatively unknown young captain by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte to help stage the siege of the city. Toulon was recaptured by France in the winter, and for his service, Napoleon was promoted to the rank of Brigadier General. The most infamous counter-revolution, however, occurred in the Vendée region. Throughout 1793, revolutionary forces clashed with the region's Catholic and Royal Army. The Republic defeated the counter-revolution through cruel pacification. In particular, General Jean-Baptiste Carrier committed brutal atrocities. In one instance, he had thousands of civilians, priests, women, and children tied to ships, which were then sunk. Carrier would later be found guilty of war crimes.
Jeez, okay.
Back in Paris, the government was still dominated by moderates. With the war going badly, revolts in the provinces, and the economy getting worse, it seemed the government just wasn't doing a very good job. Radicals' fear for the safety of the revolution intensified, and Marat even began calling for the moderates in the government to be executed. In return, the moderates called for the arrest of Marat. This led to a chain of events with the two sides in heated conflict. Robespierre declared the Jacobins to be an insurrection and called on the people to arm themselves. It all ended on the 31st of May 1793 with the National Convention surrounded by radical sans-culottes and 29 moderate Girondin politicians arrested. From this moment on, the moderates ceased to be a political force. Robespierre and his radicals would be in almost total control of the government. And this brings us to the story of a woman named Charlotte Corday. Charlotte lived in the northwest city of Caen, and like many in the area, was horrified at the rapid radicalization and increasing violence of the revolution. And the man she blamed more than anyone was Jean-Paul Marat. She wanted to bring peace back to France, and so she did something drastic. She traveled to Paris and told Marat she had a list of enemies for him to publish in his paper. Marat eagerly invited her in for a meeting. So where's that list of enemies you promised me?
List of enemies.
Wait a minute. This isn't a list of enemies. It just says yippee-ki-yay, mother.
Okay,
And just like
jeez.
that, Marat
Is
was no
there?
more. Charlotte was quickly arrested and sent to the guillotine. Her dream of restoring peace, however, died with her. Marat became a martyr. In temples of reason, symbols of the dead Marat became the new crucifix. In death, he became an even more powerful inspiration for the extreme violence that we're about to rip throughout the new republic. And that's right, here comes the Reign of Terror.
The Reign of Terror.
If you thought this revolution already sounds pretty violent, well, you ain't seen nothing yet, son. The radicals were now in control, and they believed not only was France surrounded by foreign enemies, but that within the masses, there were also plenty of internal ones too. Individuals not loyal to the revolution, conspiring to bring about its downfall. Robespierre and the rest of the radical faction were having none of it. A new committee of public safety was established with 12 members. Its purpose was to protect the new French Republic from its enemies, and it basically became a 12-man dictatorship with Robespierre as its leading voice. The Revolutionary Tribunal was also reinstated, a special court created to streamline the process of trying suspected enemies and handing out death sentences. With these two new institutions, Robespierre wanted to scare France's enemies straight. In September 1793, it was announced that terror would be the order of the day. In other words, fear had become official government policy. And from then onwards, we enter into the period known as the Reign of Terror. Spies and secret police were everywhere and watched the people closely. France's public had to be extremely careful what they said and how they behaved. Obviously, criticizing this new system, or the government, would quickly have you sent off to the guillotine.
Guillotine.
That's not all. Even the most minor offense could have you tried before the Revolutionary Tribunal. Hello, Citizen Martin. Hello, Monsieur Dubois. Monsieur? Did I just hear you
Monsieur.
say That's the old style of address, my friend. To the guillotine. You know what? I didn't like him, but I do feel kind of bad for the king and his family. Oof, expressing sympathy for the royal family, are we? To the guillotine. Seuss for a loaf of bread.
That's kind of harsh.
Way overpriced. To the guillotine. Man, this bread line is taking forever. To the guillotine. And you look like you're thinking anti-revolutionary.
Okay, thinking.
To the guillotine. Max, we're sending way too many people to the guillotine. To the guillotine! Chop, 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 chop.
Okay.
It was insane. All across France, about 40,000 people were killed
40,000.
for suspected crimes against liberty. Let's say your neighbor won't stop mowing the lawn at 7 in the morning. Well, then all you gotta do is tell the government they've been talking smack about the revolution. And there's a good chance they'll end up in front of the Revolutionary Tribunal. Maybe they'll even be executed, taking a metaphorical load off your shoulders and a literal one off theirs. The most prominent victim of the Reign of Terror was a certain Marie Antoinette, who was finally tried and found guilty of treason in 1793. She expected she'd be brought to the guillotine in a royal carriage, fit for a queen. All the Republic could provide for her, however, was a wooden tumbler. At 37 years old, the most hated woman in French history met her end on the 16th of October, 1793.
Most hated woman.
Robespierre had saved the revolution through terror. Internal dissent was being suppressed. The food situation was no longer quite as bad. Even the French military had got its act together again and pummeled the Allies at the Battle of Fleurus. For Danton and his followers, the time was right to try to normalize the French Republic. Hey Robespierre, so we were thinking that since things are finally going better, maybe we should rein in the terror. And while we're on it, we could possibly start taking it easier on the church, and also try to end this costly war. Oh, crap.
Okay.
As
Here
time
to the
went on,
guillotine.
Robespierre seemed to go, for lack of a better term, a bit mental. He was hell-bent on creating what he called a republic of virtue. And for him, this meant amping up the bloodshed even more. Throughout the spring and summer of 1794, executions reached an unprecedented level during a period known as the Great Terror.
The Great Terror.
Those closest to him found their way to the guillotine if they dared oppose his ideas and actions, and he began alienating himself from the rest of the convention. He created a new deistic religion called the Cult of the Supreme Being, along with the new annual Festival of the Supreme Being. Man, I think Robespierre is really starting to lose it. He thinks he's a god or something. Nonsense. Sure, he's gone a little extreme, but he doesn't think he's a god. My children, bathe your immortal souls in the virtue of my republic. Okay, yeah,
Okay.
completely lost it.
Yeah.
Robespierre's ultimate mistake, however, came on July 26th when he made a speech to the National Convention in which he said this: I have in my hand a brand new list of enemies to be sent to the guillotine, and many of you are on this list, but I'm not going to tell you who yet. What do you think of that?
Okay.
I think we should send Robespierre to the guillotine first. All in favor? No. 2 days later, Robespierre became the final victim of the
Damn.
monstrous terror and paranoia he had created. Many historical accounts of the revolution end here with the death of Robespierre and his terror. But
Okay.
the revolution officially continued for another 5 years,
Another-
until 1799. So what happened between now and then? Well, after the fall of Robespierre, a more moderate political group called the Thermidorians took control.
Thermidorians.
They wanted to restore stability to the government. Now, Robespierre's allies and other radicals who had fueled the terror themselves became the target of political suppression. Bourgeois street fighters took on the radical sans-culottes in the streets during a period named the White Terror. In 1795, the Thermidorians drafted a new constitution and created a government called the Directory with the purpose of preventing power from being able to fall into the hands of a single individual again. As this new government was being established, royalists who wanted to bring the monarchy back to France saw this moment as an opportunity to strike. They staged an insurrection in Paris and battled with the National Guard in the streets. Luckily, one Napoleon Bonaparte happened to be in Paris at the time, and he took control of the situation, firing on the crowd and putting down the insurrection. From this moment on, the people of Paris would never again be able to stage a popular uprising and lost their control over the revolution. For his actions, Napoleon became a general and was sent to take control of the French armies in Italy. The new Directory remained a fairly ineffective government for the remainder of the revolution. It was plagued with corruption and struggled to keep the economy afloat, and as a result, wasn't very popular. For the people of France, with the strict social customs of both royalist France and the terror gone, they didn't really know what to do with themselves. Men no longer removed their hats when talking to women. Different classes began intermingling, and a publication began circulating that looked a lot like a modern dating app. It was social anarchy. Outside of France, the war continued. In 1795, France took the Netherlands, where they set up a puppet state. Then they negotiated both Prussia and Spain out of the war. The British attempted to land French royalists in the west to reinforce rebellion, but that plan failed. In 1796, the French planned a three-pronged attack with the aim of marching on Vienna and knocking Austria out of the war. The two northern armies were defeated and forced to retreat. However, Napoleon in the south, with groundbreaking military strategy, won battle after battle after battle. He pushed the
That's
Austrians
cool.
out of Italy and began closing in on Vienna. The Austrians freaked out, and Napoleon oversaw the signing of a peace treaty. He had almost single-handedly knocked Austria out of the war. And by the way, he was only 28, so maybe it's about time you moved out of your mom's basement. Napoleon became a famed hero among the French people, but his aspirations were still higher. He briefly went off to Egypt and discovered a bunch of gnarly Egyptian stuff, but then the British destroyed his fleet and trapped his forces. Said Napoleon, sir, you're not going to leave us here stuck in Egypt and return to France, are you? Nonsense, my boy. I would never dream of abandoning my loyal soldiers. Wow, what's that over there?
Okay, he's gone.
On his return to Paris, Napoleon found himself to be extremely popular, and the government extremely unpopular, and he started getting some power-hungry ideas. Conveniently, a politician named Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès approached Napoleon and said, "Hey man, since you're so popular, do you want to help me stage a coup?" "Great idea. Let's stage a coup, and then I'll coup you." What? Napoleon, with the help of his politician brother, entered the government chamber, possibly got punched in the face, and finally his troops intimidated the council to dissolve the government and create a new constitution that basically made Napoleon a dictator. So there you have it.
Dictator.
French Revolution, born with the great promise of liberty and equality. The common people dared challenge an oppressive system that had existed for centuries. But before they knew it, they found liberty sidelined by terror, equality that possibly didn't quite hit the mark, and an absolute monarchy replaced by an absolute dictator. Napoleon began stabilizing French society. He restored the Catholic Church and got rid of that crazy calendar, among other things. But he remained ever ambitious. He was France's first consul, but he slept soundly at night dreaming of doing something even bigger. Napoleon's expansionist aspirations, combined with the ongoing conflict in Europe, would eventually lead the continent into a huge conflict known today as
the Napoleonic Wars. Okay, that's ending. It was actually a pretty good video. I enjoyed it. The animation style is amazing and the video is very informative as well. I really liked the video. That was so cool. More reactions of oversimplified will be coming up, so make sure to stay subscribed and leave a like, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.